Hey story seekers, welcome to Seeking Stories. It is another week and we are back at reading The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. We are quickly coming to the end of the book. We only have about 5 chapters left and we enter into another elven world, and it is one of the last kind of elf-heavy places that we'll see for quite some time in the story. And we're introduced to some new characters and a new forest. As we know, Tolkien likes his forest. Everything from Mirkwood in The Hobbit to the Old Forest, the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, to now Lothlorien. And believe me, we're not done with forest yet. So if you don't like trees and woods, it's only gonna get worse from here. Or better, because I think it's better. But, you know, each to his own as far as what they think about trees and woods. But beyond that, we have the fact that hope is gone without Gandalf. All the characters are mourning, but they have to keep going. They have to make choices on what to do next. They have to escape more orcs, even though the threat isn't as great as before as far as what they encounter face to face. And they also have to face the threat of, ironically enough, the elves, because the elves are a very cautious people and they don't have love for dwarves. And there is a dwarf in their company, the Fellowship's company. And as we see, this is a point of contention, particularly when the elves want to bind the eyes of the characters through the woods. And Legolas is like, nope, this isn't happening. I'm not going to go with my eyes bound throughout the land of my kindred. And Gimli's like, well, if I have to go with my eyes bound, you are too. And Aragorn's like, you know what? Let's just all go and, you know, let's deal it together. The lot of us, the 8 of us, we're all going to go with our eyes bound, and we're going to put aside our pride as much as possible and try to be humble about this. And it's a mark of a good leader, I think. You know, Aragorn has every single right in the world to go and lead his company through no matter what is going on with the rest of them. I mean, goodness, he's been to this land before, as we learn. He knows these people, even though he doesn't let on to the extent of how much he knows them. But he says, you know, let the last be first and the first be last. The whole biblical idea. He suggests, bind my eyes and everyone else's, and we'll go on this journey to the heart of Lothlorien together. This brings up one of the themes of the story. Another theme. There's so many great themes in Lord of the Rings. Indeed, in nothing is the power of the Dark Lord more clearly shown than in the estrangement that divides all those who still oppose him. And I think Tolkien was, was preaching to a lot of the choir in a lot of the ways, having come out of World War I and World War II. He sees what happens when allies don't get along. And he plays that theme into a lot of his story. We'll see that again later on with some other cultures in Middle-earth. But that's one of the driving forces of the enemy is to divide those who oppose him. Because if you're divided, you can't stand. But if you're together, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. So Aragorn, and as we see later on, Galadriel sends a message to the elves saying that they may walk freely without their eyes bound. And we have the characters of Middle-earth, kind of the wise, like Aragorn, like Galadriel, knowing that in order for this fight against evil to succeed, there has to be unity. There has to be some sort of setting aside old prejudices and differences and just moving on for the sake of the world, honestly. And about Lothlorien, we have this. A strange feeling had come upon him, Frodo. It seemed to him that he had stepped over a bridge of time into a corner of the elder days, and was now walking in a world that was no more. In Rivendell, there was memory of ancient things. In Lorien, the ancient things still lived on in the waking world. It seemed to him that he had stepped through a high window that looked on a vanished world. Keep that in mind, the fact that it feels like they're in the past, even potentially into the first age of Middle-earth where elves ruled and reigned and had their forest. I say this term loosely, but they're magical forests. Elves don't think of it quite that way, but to the mere mortals like hobbits, there is a certain magic to it. Remember that quote in that whole sentiment, because that is going to come back to us in a couple of chapters. And I want to touch on it at that point because I don't want to spoil things now. So the last thing I want to talk about is this quote. At the hill's foot, Frodo found Aragorn standing still and silent as a tree, but in his hand was a small golden bloom of Eleanor, and a light was in his eyes. He was wrapped in some fair memory, and as Frodo looked at him, he knew that he beheld things as they once had been in the same place. For the grim years were removed from the face of Aragorn, and he seemed clothed in white, a young lord tall and fair, and he spoke words in the Elvish tongue, to one whom Frodo could not see. Arwen, Venimelda, Namariel, here my heart dwells ever, unless there be a light beyond the dark rounds, that we still must tread, you and I. We briefly met Arwen in Rivendell, and Arwen is, of course, Elrond's daughter. She is also the granddaughter of Galadriel. Elrond married the daughter of Galadriel, and Arwen is her granddaughter. And unlike in the movies where we see Arwen a lot more, we don't get to see the love of Aragorn's life, the elf maiden, the elf princess really, Arwen, in the story much at all. There is a part in the appendices where Aragorn and Arwen's story is fleshed out so much more. And once the story is done, I highly recommend going into the appendices and reading that, because it delves into a lot of the history and the things that aren't stated here. But we have this moment here because it was in Lothlorien where Aragorn and Arwen first met. And Aragorn is really having that memory of a time, decades past. Aragorn is much older than he seems. He is around mid-80s. The Dunedain race can live to, between 150, 200 years old. So he's really kind of middle-aged as far as that goes. But he has seen lifetimes in a way of the men of Middle Earth as far as being able to kind of travel with them and ride to war with them. He fought with many people who have long since retired, reached retirement age, but he is still, young in the days of his kind, the Dunedain, the men of Numenor. So he's remembering that time where he met Arwen when things are still always, crazy in Aragorn's life, but some of the cares and worries that he has now were not there. So keep that in mind, because Aragorn also has that on his mind throughout this journey. Because if there's ever going to be a chance for him to be with his beloved, the ring has to be destroyed, honestly. And that's really all there is to it. So Aragorn, again, has layers and layers and layers that we're really only just starting to unpeel. So I hope you like this chapter. It gets a lot more crazy as always. Drop a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you soon for the next chapter.